You're watching memorable entertainment television. MeTV Tri-State.
This year in the Tri-State, 1 out of 8 people will be in an accident.
Would you know what to do?
Call Woods & Woods. They'll get you help.
When you call Woods & Woods, you are not a statistic. You are our client, and we will fight to get the money you deserve.
And that's what Mike did. He really fought hard for me. They just really cared.
If you've been injured, call 1-800-544-2108.
Let Woods & Woods work for you. You don't owe us a dime unless we win your case.
Tri-State Voices, an open discussion with area leaders on issues affecting communities throughout the Tri-State. Now, here's your host, Mike Woods.
Good morning. Welcome to Tri-State Voices. Hi, I'm your host, Mike Woods. Tri-State Voices is jointly sponsored by WTSN, the City County Observer, and Woods & Woods. Every week we interview community leaders concerning issues that are important to the Tri-State. This week we're honored to have the Evansville Chief of Police, Billy Bolin. Chief Bolin, welcome.
Thanks.
Probably the best place to start out is if you could just tell the people who you are. How'd you get from police officer to the chief?
I think a whole lot of luck. I've been on the police department since 1998. Actually, I met Mayor Winnicky when he was vice president at Fifth Third Bank, and I was helping organize the Kids Kingdom build. And I think just through those meetings, it kind of helped get me to the spot I am, and trying to make the most of it.
Okay. You clearly enjoy your job. I mean, it's a huge job, but you enjoy it, don't you?
I love it. I really do. It's been my dream since I first became a police officer. I mean, anybody I think in any job would like to be at the top spot there. So I got it and trying to make the most of it, but I do. I love it. Stressful, but it's a fun job.
Well, I know anytime I talk to you, you seem really enthusiastic about it. Why don't you tell the viewers how big the police department is? Because I don't think most of them realize it's huge, isn't it?
Yeah, we have about 320 employees, 289 sworn police officers, several different units within our department. We have patrol, detective, and detective division. You have juvenile detectives, homicide detectives, auto theft detectives. So we've got several specialized units. Juvenile has the school liaison unit within it. We have a crime prevention unit, canine unit. Then we have specialty teams like the canines, the SWAT, bomb squad. So there's a lot of moving pieces within our police department, and depending on the different scenario, you may have several of these pieces that interact with each other. And then, you know, incidents like the big fire run yesterday where you have other city agencies that we have to work with in tandem, and we do joint training sessions with them as well.
Okay.
So,
well, what's a normal day for you?
In this job, it's more office and meetings. Like this morning, I've started off going to Coffee with a Cop this morning, and then I had to teach our officers an in-service training class, and now we're doing this. Later this afternoon, I've got Leadership Evansville Awards. We got our Citizens Academy kicking off tonight. So most days are very busy. I'm good or lucky to get my emails answered, and a lot of times I'm doing that at 9 o'clock at night trying to catch up. So it's a busy job, whirlwind job, not a lot of meat and potatoes police work from the chief's position, so it's the other guys taking care of that where you're more the administrative role.
It's pretty clear that you want your police officers to be involved in the community.
Absolutely.
Why do you think that's important?
Well, I think it's a community trust. A lot of what police work is interacting with the community. We don't solve crimes on our own. Contrary to what you see on TV with your CSI shows, we need that human interaction. And you know, we'd be lying or remiss if we didn't admit that there's a lot of the community that doesn't trust the police. And it's not unique to Evansville, it's nationwide. So I think the more we can do to build those relationships, to build that trust, interact with the community, the more they're going to trust us and want to work with us.
Okay, well, like for example, a minute ago you mentioned the Coffee with a Cop. What is that program?
This is something that a couple years ago I went to a conference and I found a little card that they'd put out that said Coffee with a Cop, and on it it said no agendas, no PowerPoints, just conversation. And I thought, you know, it's such a unique idea. So when I came back here to town, I talked with my staff and I said, you know, we ought to look at doing this. So we went and we met with the Kemps from Donut Bank, and we said, you know, would you guys be interested in partnering with us? And maybe once a month we just go to a different side of town, and we go in, we don't have an agenda. We just go in and meet with people and talk and answer their questions and be there. And it's turned out to be a pretty neat thing. A lot of people like it. And we do it once a month, typically the third Tuesday. During the summers, we've done some Saturdays. And then we're looking at maybe doing some more events where we do some kid-friendly stuff where we bring out some of our vehicles that may attract them more. But It's just conversation and meeting with the public one-on-one.
And then you have the Choose Not to Lose program.
Yes.
What's that?
Choose Not to Lose is kind of where we tied all of our things we do with kids under one banner. And it kind of originated with my son came into work with me one weekend in the first year I was in the job. And I was catching up on emails. He's looking through police magazines, and he found a picture of this cool police car from Florida. And it said tornadoes on the side of it and had like a silhouette of a tornado. And he came over and showed it to me, and it was bright red. And I said, well, that's a fire vehicle. And then the more I look at it, I realized it was the, I think it was Bradenton County Dare car from Florida. And I thought, you know, we've got officers assigned to each one of our high schools.
The tornadoes was the school mascot.
It was the school mascot, yes. So that's what made me think, you know, we've got these schools here in Evansville, and we've got an officer assigned to each one. That'd be kind of a neat way to bring some ownership to the kids and tie them into what we're doing and maybe get them talking with us. But I didn't know how we would do this. I didn't want to spend a lot of taxpayer money on it, so I started talking to some different dealerships, and I met Larry Bennett from Audubon Chrysler Bennett Motors. And after several meetings, he agreed to donate 7 Jeep Wranglers. So we got 6 for the police department, and the sheriff's department covers North High School, so we got 1 for them. And each one matches the school. It's got the colors of the school. And then we came up with this Choose Not to Lose logo that we put on them. And then for all of our talks we do in the schools with the kids, we tie in that concept of everything revolves around a choice. It's your choice to make good grades. It's your choice to stay out of trouble. It's your choice to say no to drugs. Anything you have out there, you can narrow it down to a choice. You can choose to do the right thing, or you can choose to do the wrong thing. And it's been a pretty good campaign so far, and we anticipate that we'll keep moving forward and doing more of this in the future.
And what's the Crime-Free Evansville program you have?
This is something we had 2 of our CPOs, crime prevention officers, had went to a class under the past administration on this crime-free program, and they were trying to get it up and going. And when I came in, they came to me and said, this is something we had talked with Chief Hill about. We'd like to continue it. It sounded like a good idea, so I approved it. And what it is they work real close with property owners, management associations, to make sure they got the best tenants as possible. They follow some tenets of what's called CPTED. It's crime prevention through environmental design. And this could be things like your lighting of your property, your bushes, keeping them trimmed to a certain height, your trees, keeping them trimmed up to a certain height to create like clear and visible lines, and it helps keep crime down. And so they've started this program. They actually have a class kicking off this week. And I think and I may be wrong on the number, but about 60 property owners I think we're going to be in this class this week. They started it last year, but it's just teaching these tenants, and they're working with them. If they have somebody arrested for possession of drugs in one of their properties, the 2 officers that run the program will notify them the next day, let them know they have them, and it helps weed these properties out and make for safer environments for a lot of the people that live in the properties that are being managed by these different landlords.
Just kind of send a message, crime's not going to be tolerated in this area.
Exactly. And in other communities, it's been highly successful. I know we've got one manager here in town that I think came from Arizona and had managed properties out there, and she had talked about how the crime in her properties had just went down dramatically from being a part of this program. So it's basically trying to weed out the bad element, and you know, the bad apples that are doing this, if we spread citywide, eventually, and we have no shame in saying this, if we can shove the bad apples onto another community, that's better for us.
Okay. One of the programs you started not very long ago was the one where they have cameras on police officers. How's that working out?
So far, really good. We've had a little bumps in the road. I mean, a lot of the officers are nervous that think, you know, the administration's out to get them, or worried about the public, what they may think of what we do. But we've looked at studies, we've looked around the country, they've been highly successful. They're helping officers in court, they're helping when we get complaints against us, justifying our actions. And I think it makes for a more professional officer too. If you know that what you're saying to somebody's being recorded, you're probably going to say it in a nicer manner, or be more on your A game. I think anybody, when they know they've got a camera on them, they're going to act a little different than they may without it.
Sure.
So with all of our uniformed officers wearing this, I think we're going to provide a better service to the public. And I think it's going to be easier when we have complaints to verify if these complaints are accurate or not. We've had an officer, a lady called dispatch and accused him of making a sexual comment towards her. The camera has shown that comment was never made. It was completely made up. We had yesterday an officer got in a foot chase with a subject. Guy pulled a gun on him, turned around, looked like he tried to shoot the officer. That whole incident is on video, so it's going to be great when we get to a courtroom and be able to show that, when a jury can see what we're seeing firsthand. So I think these are going to have a lot of dividends for us and the community.
Okay, and how does that work? It's mounted on the police officer's uniform and the car, or what?
These are just on the uniform. It's got a little battery pack that will go in your pocket, and it's got a short cord, and the camera is just a little square piece that'll be right here. What we're encouraging our officers to do is before they get out the car, click the little button and it kind of vibrates, lets them know it's on. There's a little red dot on the top so you can tell if it's recording. And any citizen encounter where there's enforcement action, we want being recorded. So if you're stopped on a traffic stop, if an officer responds to a domestic violence run, if another officer's doing something and you stop to back them up in a system, we want these encounters being recorded. Now if the officer's out at the Bigfoot getting a cup of coffee and you go up and talk to him, we're not wanting to record that. We have officers working in the schools that are walking around talking to people all day long. They're not supposed to record all these encounters. It's just when there's some type of enforcement action or they're acting in an official police capacity on something that we want those being recorded.
Okay, now is that just recorded or is it actually transmitted live downtown?
No, just recorded. There's no live view. That's more one of the television things you'd see.
Yeah.
Like, I like the show Blue Bloods. I was just watching that the other day where the police commissioner is watching as the officers raid something live time. That technology is probably out there somewhere, but it's not something we can afford or
Too
have.
expensive.
Yeah, but ours at the end of their shift or sometime, our policy is once a day they download. So at the end of the shift, they may not do it today, but tomorrow at some point they're going to download what they did today. And it goes into a computer system, and then we can access it. The different supervisors, other officers, detective units can pull them up and watch the video if there's a case they're interested in.
It does seem like if they could downtown watch it live, it could be helpful. I mean, if a police officer's attacked or something, they could see it right then where he may not be able to call for assistance, and they could see right then he needs help.
Oh, absolutely. I think it would be a good tool. And, you know, as technology keeps advancing and improving and getting cheaper, I could see that being something in the future. For us now, though, I don't think there's just the storage space for the amount of video that we're recording is a headache enough for us trying to figure out how we're doing that and the funding for it. So I think that's our hurdle right now. In the future, maybe it'd be neat to have, but I doubt that'll happen anytime during my administration.
Well, all that stuff's getting cheaper and cheaper, you know, and eventually you can probably do it. How much did those cameras cost?
We spent about $190,000 on the cameras we have. They were, I think, $800-something per officer, and we have about 190-something officers that have these. So our whole department doesn't, but everybody that wears a uniform in their daily function that's out working with the public has one. Me, I wear a uniform a lot, but I'm in the office, so I don't have one. I wouldn't have a need for it. Like I said, in 2 years, I've not made an arrest or wrote a ticket to somebody. So we're wanting the enforcement action as the goal of these.
You know, I can tell you, when I was a prosecutor, every prosecutor happens to, you get grievances filed against you by defendants. I mean, you're trying to put people in prison. Appreciate that. And I can't imagine me doing a trial against a criminal defendant and not having that thing recorded. I mean, I predict that it'll exonerate many, many more police officers than it's going to cause grief to.
Yeah, there was a study in Rialto, California. They did them for about a year, and they have about 90-something officers that were wearing the cameras. And their numbers for complaints went from anywhere from 30 to 50-something a year. It kind of fluctuated. And the first year that they had these, their complaints dropped to 3. From 30-something to 50-something. Their uses of force dropped in over a half. So I think you're going to see a big difference. I had some officers say they were on a run last week, and there was a bunch of people yelling at each other and screaming at each other, and then one of the people said, "Is that camera recording?" And the officer said, "Yeah," and they said the whole room completely changed. People quit yelling at each other, they started acting better. So I think more and more as the public realizes we're using these, they're going to act different. And like I said, I think our officers are going to act different.
You know, obviously, if you look at one of these recordings and it shows the police officer's done something wrong, then you're going to have to deal with that, discipline, whatever. Suppose that somebody makes a false complaint against a police officer. I mean, you look at it and they just flat lied about him. It seems to me that's pretty serious. I mean, they could cause somebody to lose their job, lose their pension, lose their health insurance, cause criminal charges filed. Would you recommend those be turned over to the prosecutor for possible criminal charges against somebody that makes a false report?
Yeah, absolutely we would. And that's something we've said in years past too, but it's been hard to prove. So now with these cameras, we're going to be able to prove that. If somebody accuses our officer of hitting them or beating them, and our video shows that that's completely unfounded, it didn't happen, I absolutely plan on sending a file to the prosecutor on that. These guys have a tough job. They put their lives on the line every day. and they're out here trying to protect our community. And a lot of times we're under that microscope, and we do have a lot of false accusations. So, you know, I'm wanting us to be a more professional police department to the community, but on the same time, I expect our community to respect the job we're doing. And if they're not going to do that, we would definitely follow through with charges to the prosecutor.
I can tell you, if I were a prosecutor and somebody filed a false report like that, and I don't mean to misunderstand or something, but I mean it's clear they just lied, I'd file charges on it.
Yeah, and there's going to be times where, like we've had one in the past few weeks already, where an officer was accused of being rude. And the person that called in didn't say he called him a name, didn't say he cussed him, nothing like that, but just the officer was rude. And when you go back and look at it, the officer was pretty robotic, and what he said, how he did things, wasn't rude, but he wasn't overly nice. And I had one of the supervisors say that he reviewed it with the officer because they had the complaint. And as the officer was watching it, the officer said, you know, I probably could have handled that a little different. So it wasn't anything where he got in trouble. He didn't do anything wrong, but it was a good teaching tool for that officer to see after somebody complained on him that, yeah, while I wasn't berating this guy, I was pretty robotic in my motions, and maybe I could handle that different next time. So that's one of those examples where I think they're going to be a really good tool.
Okay, so they'll be used as a training tool in addition to everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the incident we talked about yesterday where we had the foot pursuit and the officer had the gun pulled on him, the safety for the suspect's gun was on. It's my belief that the suspect tried to shoot our officer, but you know, it's so fast and so you can't really tell what his finger's doing in that trigger. But I think just by the look at it, this guy was trying to shoot our officer, but the safety was on. We will definitely use that as an in-house training tool to show other officers when you're chasing somebody what to be conscious of, how to protect yourself, use the cover. And I'm not saying our officer did anything wrong. Okay? He did a great job, but we can always learn from these types of things and what to look for in the future.
Okay. In the last year's budget, I think your department was cut, what, $450,000,
yes,
something like that. And of course, all the governmental entities across the nation, state, federal, municipals, everybody's hurting. How'd you guys deal with that?
Well, it was after the budgets were already approved, so it was earlier this year that we found out that we were going to get the cut. And I think the property taxes didn't come in at what we thought they were going to come in. So we had to be creative in how we were going to do this. We have two ladies that do our finances for us, and our options were basically we cut overtime, which we use our overtime for crimes. If we have patterns of things we're working on for different community events, so it's pretty important that we have that budget there. Our take-home vehicle program, our fuel cost. I've been a big advocate for years on how important these cars are. I think the public likes seeing more cars. If you've got one living on your street, the more you see, it gives you that perception of safety. People like seeing them in their neighborhoods. So what we ended up doing was we have a comp buyback program, which officers can have up to 200 hours in their comp bank. And once a year, we've allowed officers to buy back some of that time. So a lot of guys will buy back a portion to go on a vacation. Or I had one officer tell me he was going to fix his fence. Assistant Chief Chris Pugh was going to do the buyback.
So they're kind of cashing out overtime?
Yes.
All right.
So, and that's been standard practice for years, but it's in our contract that it's if the funding's available, you do it. So we typically will pay out around $250,000 a year for that. So we're going to cut that for this year. It's not taking anything away from the guys, it's just deferring it. If they want to take the time off, they can still take their time off. If somebody retires, they can still get their time. But it will basically just not buy back this year. It's going to have to wait till next year to do that. And then the rest of our makeup there is we do 2 hires a year. We hire in the fall, we hire in the winter. And this summer, or I say the fall, the summer and the winter. And this summer we hire in June. Well, we've got some retirements that are going to happen after that point. So those excess salaries that we'd have had in the end of the year will make up the rest of that budget shortfall.
Okay, well what about next year? I mean, you can't just keep doing that every year.
Yeah, well, next year it'll be a new budget, and as we work out the budget late summer into the fall this year, we'll try to plan accordingly for this, and then hopefully not have to run into the same issue. I mean, this is my 3rd year. In the first 2 years, I didn't have my budget cut, so hopefully we won't have that next year. But
so it might be restored. You just don't know at this point.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's too early to tell, and you know, like I said, the budget was already set and we already had plans in place, so then you got to start figuring out. And no matter what we would have done, and when you start cutting money, it hurts. You know, if you think of your home budget, if you start making $50 less per week, you got to figure out if you don't want to go out and eat that week, or if you're going to start cutting back on going to the gym, or whatever it is you do, If you cut, it's a cut, so it's going to hurt a little bit, but we're going to provide the same police service. The citizens are not going to see any difference in how we respond to anything, so we figured out a way to make it work where it's not really going to affect anything we do.
Well, you know, the county had to cut their budget from somewhere last year around $53 million to around $49 million. And $4 million in cuts, that's a lot. And they're going to have to perhaps make more cuts. And they're facing the same problem you are.
And it's nationwide. It's happening everywhere. You can't really point the finger and blame any one person. It's what it is. The economy is not as great as it once was. But, you know, hopefully it'll rebound. And I'm an optimist. I like to think along those lines. But if it doesn't, we'll make some more hard decisions in the future.
Yeah, it's going to be some tough decisions in both the city and county as time goes on. One thing I wanted to ask you about, I've heard a lot about over the years and never really understood it. How does the Police Merit Commission work?
Police Merit Commission is over our hiring, our discipline. That we've got a 3-member board. We've got 1 person appointed by the FOP membership, 1 person appointed by the mayor, and 1 person appointed by the city council. So say I have an officer get in trouble today. We will review it internally. We'll have our internal affairs look at it. He'll do the investigation. He sends the file to me. And then the chain of command for that officer. So say it's a street level officer, his sergeant, lieutenant, captain, the deputy chief, assistant chief, and I will all meet in a room. We let the lowest ranking person make his recommendation first, and then it goes up that chain, and we'll all discuss why we think whatever should happen. Once we've made a decision on what we're going to do, I send it to the Police Merit Commission. So I can suspend an officer, I can recommend we terminate him, I can do these different things. Ultimately, it's the Police Merit Commission that makes that decision. I make recommendations to them. Sometimes they agree with me, sometimes they don't. They can make it worse. They can rescind it. So they've got a lot of power when it comes to the police department, but it keeps us honest, and it allows the citizens basically to have control over the police issues more than us. So, and they also do the same with hiring. Like the police chief, I don't hire anybody. We have a process they go through. It's a merit-based system. And at the end of the day, it's the Police Merit Commission that approves and signs off on us hiring officers.
Okay. Well, if somebody wanted to become a police officer, how would they go about it?
We have yearly hirings. It's a long process. If anybody out there is interested and want to go through it, or if you've done it and you didn't get hired the first time, I'd encourage you to come back again. It's a written test. We have 2 sets of interviews, 1 before that Police Merit Commission we discussed, 1 before a panel of police officers. You have to do a psychological exam. You have to go through a polygraph, thorough background check. We'll go talk to previous employers, next door neighbors, friends. We do a pretty thorough check because we're wanting to get the best candidates that can be out here and deal with the public, carry a gun, make smart decisions. So it's pretty complicated. It takes a long time. It took me twice getting on here. The first time I didn't make the cut. I got hired in Henderson, Kentucky, did a couple years over there at their police department, and came back the next time and applied again. And I think if you talk to most of our officers, the first time they don't make it. Our interview process is pretty rigid. You don't get a lot of smiling and nods of approval. It's very formal, and they sit there and they're writing the whole time. And like for me, after that first question or 2, I thought I've just bombed this interview. And it's just, I didn't understand the process. 2 years later, I came back and they're still staring at me and they weren't smiling, but I kept smiling and kept talking and did fine. So that's anybody out there, if you're listening or you're interested, do your research, go talk to a police officer, ask advice, and if you don't make it that first time, learn from it and come back and do it again.
All right, suppose once you hire a police officer, how do you start them out? Do you send them to school? Do they start working, or what?
We have our own academy here that's pretty much driven by the Evansville Police Department. Our guys are in charge of it, run it, but we have officers from Vincennes, Newburgh, Mount Vernon, come in and help teach some of the classes and share the responsibility with us. But it's called the Southwest Indiana Law Enforcement Academy. We're housed in the basement of the C.K. Newsom Center. We've got an academy class going right now as we speak, and they go through thorough training. They learn firearms, emergency vehicle operations, criminal law, traffic law, just a whole lot of things they go through during the course of this, physical tactics. And then when they're done with that, we do our own house officer training school for EPD officers. And then after they finish that officer training school, we put them in a car and they start doing a field training program. And this is where for about 4 months, you ride with a different officer each month. They grade you every single night, and they're being really nitpicky. We're looking for every little thing they do, good or bad, and we document it to the T. And typically almost every class that we hire will have somebody that doesn't make it through. And it doesn't mean that they're not capable. It's just this job is very tough, and we want the best. And there's guys that can be really successful in another field that just weren't cut out for our field. And you know, I had a guy that I got hired with didn't make it through that first year, and pretty much every year we'll have somebody that doesn't make it through. It's a tough process.
Well, and emotionally, it's a very demanding job. You get called into the worst situations where people are drunk and high and angry and confused, scared, and everything else, and you're supposed to be the rescuer, the defender, and yet totally unemotional, stable.
You're exactly right, and we get criticized from the public a lot because the way we react to certain things, but it's hard to turn yourself into a robot. You are human. You do have emotions. I mean, if you show up at a house and you've got a little 2-year-old running around in feces and alcoholic parents and everything, it's hard not to get angry at that situation. And so you got to control and you got to try to separate yourself, but at the same time, you need to be compassionate. And to find that balance in there can be a pretty tough thing. So I think that our officers do a great job training these officers, and they put them in these highly stressful situations every day while they're training, because we want them to be able to respond to the real life stressful situations that they're going to encounter out here.
I know sometimes when I was a prosecutor, you'd read the police reports and you could feel yourself getting mad just reading the things. And I can't imagine walking in there and having to deal with that right there, and these people screaming and yelling, like you say, the kids being abused and all that sort of thing. You know, as a lawyer, you walk into the nice courtroom, it's air conditioned, and people by then they're sober, they've calmed down. And yet, your emotions can still get the best of you.
Yep, you're exactly right. And a lot of times, like coming into this job, you would have never heard me say a cuss word. And you go into a lot of these rooms or houses or runs that we're going, and some people in the community don't understand other things. You can ask somebody to calm down, to be quiet, to quit yelling, to quit screaming, and until you use some kind of explicit word to them, they're not going to listen to it. And my wife, I had told her that early in our marriage, and she thought that was crazy. And I said, you know, until you're out there in these runs, you don't understand. You've got to be firm with people, and sometimes you got to talk on their level to get them to understand what you want done. And I think to the general public, a lot of times that's a little shocking, but it does harden you a little bit. And as an officer, it's something you got to constantly do, is try to keep yourself grounded, keep yourself involved, you know, with your family, with your church, with outreach organizations. If you can stay grounded like that, you'll have a good career.
Yeah, but again, it's emotional. It's so tough day after day after day seeing all that, those kinds of things.
It does
got to wear on you.
It sure does. I think I'm a different person today than when I first started the job, and I think any officer would tell you that. It definitely changes your perspective on things.
I can see it wear you down. You see a lot of prosecutors, it just wears them down, seeing that stuff day after day after day, and if it just wears you down, that's where you see so many guys going to private practice after a while. So.
And we don't have that option, unfortunately. So.
All right. Well, Chief, I really appreciate your time. If somebody wants to ask you a question, or if they have a question about the Evansville Police Department, how do they get a hold of you guys? You
know, I think the easiest way in today's world is social media. We've got a Evansville Police Department Facebook page. We've got a Twitter handle. We've got a website. We're very active on these things, but also you can do the old traditional methods of calling the police department or walking down to the police station and asking to speak to a supervisor. For me, it's typically you got to get on the calendar because I've got a pretty full schedule, but there's always 24/7 a police officer you can talk to if you need to. I really, really appreciate your time. It's been good talking to you. Well, thank you. Appreciate you having me. Next week on Tri-State Voices, we're going to have the president of the City Council, John Friend. Thank you very much for joining us. See you next week.
Broke the story on local homestead tax credit fiasco. Expose the Evansville Redevelopment Commission excessive spending habits.
Your community watchdog. CityCountyObserver.com is your online community newspaper dedicated to the progress of Evansville and Vanderburgh County. We're a nonpartisan publication providing insight into political issues and events that shape our community. We are a watchdog for you, the citizen. Check us out online, city-countyobserver.com. That's city-countyobserver.com.
You're watching memorable entertainment television. Me TV Tri-State.